Today, since we've had so many questions recently about Samsara and Nirvana, I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to give some of my ideas about what I think about it, which are a little different than I felt before. If you were given a choice between two ideas like Samsara or Nirvana, which one would you choose? You might think Samsara is nothing but suffering, and Nirvana is nothing but relief or freedom. Would that be the truth? Can we think of them in a different way? And maybe they aren't as rigidly separated as we think they are. Samsara is a reality created by body, speech, and mind, with thoughts, words, and ignorant actions. It may be created by sad, brooding, angry thoughts, or happy thoughts with expectations and daydreams. All of it comes to fruition as karma, which we then live through until we've thoroughly understood it and been transformed for the better by it. We also inhabit it, but without clinging to anything. Without clinging, we can rest, even in the midst of negativity. Nirvana looks like the choice to make if we want to live without suffering. And Samsara looks like the reality we want to avoid as much as possible. We've heard that Samsara and Nirvana are the same, but we divide them anyway in our mind as much as we can, with expectations of suffering in one, but not in the other. However, we begin to think that only Samsara is real, because suffering seems so real. Nirvana is freedom, and we don't feel free, so we think it may just be an ideal, a non-existing reality, a beautiful thought, a place we'd like to inhabit if we could, but don't have the least hope of attaining. But we think that Samsara is so messed up that we have to try to fix it, impossible as it seems. In times of crisis, the sufferings of others seem more real than our own. We want to do something, anything, to try to make at least one thing better. We stand before a gigantic problem and feel worthless for doing nothing but sitting on a cushion and meditating, either in a zendo or in your home. But Suzuki Roshi said, "When you bow, the whole world bows with you." However, even reading that, we think we understand it, but we don't yet understand the power of one person sitting wholeheartedly in meditation. We only skim the surface of the full extent of suffering within us. And when we look outside, the suffering of the world we see and hear feels overwhelming. Without investing our true being in fully sitting meditation, we feel like a failure as a bodhisattva. But a bodhisattva doesn't think of suffering as a problem, not as a failure, not as a success. He or she hears the suffering of others, feels the suffering of others, even though they're all living in samsara. The bodhisattva does not claim the suffering personally. A bodhisattva in the midst of personal suffering will still bring joy to others, still experience joy with others, and yet also exist with peace and composure. A bodhisattva will celebrate the joy of others. In that sense, a bodhisattva exists in two realities equally, samsara and nirvana, and doesn't make much of either. If we believe the words of Shakyamuni Buddha in the Four Noble Truths, we'll stop at nothing to free ourselves from the self that we created with thoughts, emotions, and careless actions. We've used ourself to create mindlessly, and now we have to live with it. The suffering, the wasted lives, the terrible conditions of existence, all have their source in us, each of us, existent in each reality. The beauty of the world also has its source in each of us. We will never end suffering in samsara, but we can root out the source of suffering in ourselves, in meditation and just being present. The world will change with us, and we will continue to transform as we unfold in more complex and mysterious ways that would take a lifetime to understand. How can suffering have its source in us? Well, everything of body, speech, and mind comes from us and exists in negative forms like anger, greed, or delusion. If we want to be a complete person again, we have to retrieve everything we threw away in ignorance. We began as a whole being, but we were ignorant and eager to act. When karma returns to us, even in a form that we no longer recognize, we can meet it with composure until it returns to us peacefully. If we reject karma, it will come around again and again and again, trying to return home. So, the best thing, let it in. In reality, we neither need to avoid samsara nor hope for nirvana. Both are not places, but are really expressions of us. When we're suffering, then our name would be samsara. But when we arouse our waking mind and stop clinging, then our name is nirvana. We must understand that everything starts and ends with us, and there is no place to reside other than now, as we are, with suffering in samsara or composure in nirvana. Think of it like a big bubble. You reside in this bubble with everything. There's a red light in it and a white light. When we're challenged, we put the red light on, and when we've had enough, we switch to the white light and calm ourselves with our breath and a cup of tea or a piece of cake. When we've rested and ready, we switch on the red light again and jump back into conflict with karma. And eventually, I think we even jump back into samsara joyfully, like a child jumping into an icy lake. We may wonder, why are we here? And what are we doing? If we're just biding our time, looking for something better and waiting to die, or just hungry for something more, then our time doesn't feel complete and suffering becomes our companion. If we live in mental and emotional longing, then confusion becomes our companion. But if being here, alive, even in samsara with its trials and possibilities, is an inspiration to learn and broaden us through suffering and challenge, then you could say that we are truly born in the right place at the right time. But when we tire, then with mindfulness, we can loosen the bonds of samsara, even in the midst of personal suffering, and joy will arise and permeate us. If we welcome joy, however guilty it may make us feel in the midst of suffering, it's a healing power that we all have and need. Guilt cannot heal us like joy can. The peacefulness of nirvana is not the result of living without effort in a world of peace and quiet. But nirvana is the mind refusing to be beset by karma, suffering, and unhappy circumstances. Nirvana is the mind that lets everything pass without making trouble. Through joy and composure, we can open a breath of spirit in meditation that is vast and impervious to suffering, so all the troubled pieces of mind and body find a place within us, all together, all at once, without causing harm anywhere. And we can rest in that vast space and find our composure for as long as we need it. When we're ready, then we can shoulder our baggage once more and go back out to the experience of samsara and karma and take up the next challenge. We may think it's not necessary to take on suffering of mind and body, if we don't have to, but we need the push and shove of growing and developing our wits to deal with the challenges of samsara. We need to face our deepest being without reluctance or fear. Without that, we would tire of ourselves and even long for a bit of fuss. We need the nudge from within to change, to expand ourselves in body, speech, and mind, and we need to develop skillful means to deal with it all. We can do this right here with the circumstances we meet. As for work on the sufferings of the world, no matter how huge or unending it may seem, we can do it best dealing with small things and truly changing ourselves in a total revolution. Thank you. That's it. Okay, there. So, any questions or comments? Or
I just like to claim for you all that I am the person that creates Jane's the best opportunities for living in samsara. And
that is true. Absolutely true. Without him, I wouldn't be anywhere near it.
Good job.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Mike.
Well, Jane, you chose to live with him, so you created your own samsara by living with Peter and dealing with his samsara.
Thank you. Yeah, it's true. It's true.
It kind of a continuation of what we were discussing Tuesday. From your talk, I gained that samsara is our interpretation of what's going on and what we're dealing with. And nirvana is the same thing. It's the same substance on either side. It's how you choose to allow it to affect you, I guess, if that's not, I don't know if that's a correct way of putting it. And the hard part is we're trained through conditioning from childhood to adulthood that we are supposed to react certain ways to situations. And we have to undo that training in order to let it be, yes, even people in nirvana are going to experience suffering, and people in samsara are going to experience joy. But it's all boils down to the same thing. Life is what it is. And if I understand the books I've been reading, this studying I've been doing, our reality is our reality. We create it. And if we're in a bad mood, we create a bad one. If we're in a good mood, we create a good one. But no matter what, everything's out there, it's happening, and it's up to us as to how it affects us and how we work with it.
And the degree to which you suffer the second arrow is the degree to which you develop skillful means. So when you're in samsara, you're fighting with the two arrows, right? The one that pierces you, and then the one you try to figure out why, etc. And the other way, you just, with skillful means, you simply let it pass. Even the suffering of the arrows piercing, you let it pass. You suffer it if you have to, but you don't suffer it emotionally or mentally. Your body goes through it and learns from it, and that's it. But in nirvana, which the thing that interested me was that when people were talking about nirvana, when they talked about samsara, such emotion would come up and feelings and everything about samsara. But when they got to nirvana, they would always end up saying, but it's probably not true anyway. It probably doesn't really exist anyway. But it does, it definitely does. It's the same as samsara, but it's how we live in it. If you live in it with composure, and I'm sure everybody has had times in their life when they've had great composure in something. nothing bothered you, you were happy to let things go. You still were productive in your life. You did things and you had a quiet time and you thought, wow, my life is lucky right now. It's just luck. And I would say, no, it wasn't luck ever. It was skillful means, because you let things pass. You let things pass and pass and pass. And there was no, enormous commotion about it. And so I think, just to me, that is living in freedom. And you live with the same conditions, you simply don't grasp any of it. And you go through it and you move with the process of living. And in that sense, you flow like reality flows. But when you're in samsara, you're always damming up the stream with an emotion or something. And that's the difference, I think.
Can't cling to either one. You just have to let it all flow either way.
Well, I think a real bodhisattva would probably not care for either one, would simply call it life and not make a distinction between one is more difficult than the other. One would just be learning and one would just be relaxing and taking it easy for a little bit and letting the suffering pass for a short time. And then getting back into the fray always without hesitation.
Thank you.
That's why I think it's kind of like a child or a young kid jumping into a really cold lake. It's shocking and it's hard, but it's, there's a kind of joyfulness in it. And I think when we really appreciate our life, samsara and nirvana won't mean anything anymore. We'll just think of it as, oh, this is struggle, learning, challenge, etc. Or, wow, I'm ready for a rest, without dividing the world into ideas of, well, this is suffering and this is rest. And just say, no, I'm going to run out and do this. And no, I'm just going to sit down for a while now. And just living our life, and nothing is special about it in that sense. Anybody? Sandy.
Where did it go? Thank you for the talk, Jane. It was really nice. Your talk brought back to me something I had learned in my previous practice. It was a saying that it's suffer what there is to suffer, enjoy what there is to enjoy. And that's the way one should live their life. But in other words, not clinging to any of it, just letting it be,
Yeah.
and just experience it, but not to the point where you cling to it.
Yeah. I think when I was talking about when you really sit a solid meditation with all of yourself being present, I think that just that one person doing that does a great change in this whole world. And we don't give that enough credit for what it actually does. For example, I think when we sit, we open up some space inside and we feel, there's a lot of emotions and thoughts and stuff that go through, and we kind of empty them out slowly while we're sitting. And we reach a kind of point of spaciousness in sitting. And, we're actually very magical creatures when you think about it. We have all this space inside where you can contain everything, and you can do something about all of it just by sitting, just by calming your whole body and mind and watching how you speak. You can make an enormous difference in your whole life by doing that. And I just think, we have a possibility of so much inside that we don't even touch on it except remotely by just coming and sitting. But if we really sat down, really went down into our own ignorance and our whole being inside, we could open up so much inside and let it out. And that letting it out would be an enormous help around the world that you exist in. But we always look for outside sources and outside help when we just have everything possible inside, all possibilities. Anyway,
Yeah. Well,
we are
thank
the
you.
most magical of creatures, personally.
I want my fairy wings.
You actually have them if you would just look. You hung them out somewhere. Rachel.
I remember somewhere reading about Nirvana coming from, or at least one instance coming from, I think Sanskrit or something about extinguishing. And could it also be an extinguishing of ignorance, even though the conditions may stay the same, but it's extinguishing ignorance,
I
right? It may stay the same.
Yeah, I do. I think it is extinguishing ignorance, but you know, we have such an enormous ability to create ignorance everywhere that maybe we have to keep doing it over and over. Maybe it's not enough to extinguish it one time because then we unfold another part and here's another little petal of ignorance sitting over here. And then we have to deal with that one, you know, and so I think we're always going back and forth, back and forth. And part of that is our willingness to keep learning. Part of that is from just our complete willingness to keep doing it. And nobody wants to live in total peace and comfort all the time because the challenge is where the real spark is and the things that go on. And then when we've had enough of it, then the peace and quiet and the composure and everything really makes a difference. But finally, we love being in the challenging world, I think, because we have so much in us that wants to become conscious, and we're still fighting a lot of it. We're still trying to not face a lot of it. So no matter how much we've opened up in the world to the world, we still have a lot of us that is hiding. And I think that's the most surprising thing, is that no matter how long you've been sitting and you open up another petal inside and my gosh, there's another thing waiting to be dealt with. It's like you have a house of never-ending children coming through and you don't know what to do with all of them. And you get really tired sometimes, and when that happens, you just shut the door and say, okay, I'm done for a while. And that is the time you just sit and do what you want to do. But then you go back out because, you know, they're still banging on the door. Chris.
Yeah, I often feel like when I am comfortable, I don't want anything challenging to come up, and I'm averse to challenging situations or emotions or whatever. But inevitably, you know, I'll encounter something challenging, and oftentimes I don't have a choice about whether or not to deal with it. And I just find the experience of life when I'm engaging with a challenge rather than dragging my feet or fighting it, kicking and screaming, is much more enjoyable, and actually much more enjoyable than the comfort that I think I prefer before a challenging situation happens. And what's more, afterwards, there's a sense of relief or satisfaction that is transcendent compared to that supposed comfort. And yet, every single time a challenge comes up, I think, no, I don't want that. And I'm just like, when am I going to get the hang of not thinking that and just instinctually responding to challenges? Though I see some people, and it seems like they really thrive on that. And I don't know, maybe they just started laying in a good habit earlier on or what. But, you know, Zen training has definitely helped me do slightly less bad at meeting challenging issues.
Well, that's what's the word? I'm like, that's I can't think of the word right now. What's the word?
Good,
I'm just
bad?
talking. No, what to do in times of trouble, mother. What's that?
Mother Nature says to me, huh?
No. What is that one? That's skillful means. Skillful means. That's the degree to which you get skillful means, you know, and understand that you can't just sleep your life away, and you can't just waste it in nothing particular, but you really do have to open everything. And it's the opening which is the challenges you meet. And if you meet them, you know, it's almost always chickens coming home to roost. And so best thing is to welcome them back. And then you haven't lost anything.
Well, we can only really resolve karma by working through it.
Yeah.
I also recently read a quote that I feel at least tangentially applies, and even though we don't really talk about God much, I feel like we can extrapolate some kind of Buddhist contextual interpretation. But it's God breaks our hearts over and over again until they stay open. And then that reminds me of an answer that Norman Fisher gave to a question I asked during I forget the ceremony, but we asked questions.
Sanchiki.
Yeah. I basically asked like why love is so terrifying and painful and confusing, and he said something like, "Well, it's painful because all we've ever known is a closed heart, and love breaks open the heart." And it's confusing because I forget what his answer was to the confusing, and he said, "And it's terrifying because it's painful and confusing."
Yeah, it's I think karma breaks open the heart. You know, everything that comes to us, there's a reason for it. And if we don't get rid of it, you know, by just letting it sit within us and until it just becomes part of us again, that we lose a very important part of ourselves. So the more your heart breaks, the deeper your heart can love, I think. Sandy.
I think a lot of the samsara that we create, we really do it to verify that we're alive, that we're an individual being. It's a way to have a problem to affect us and affect us, bringing emotions to the forefront. And when we experience emotions, we feel alive, we feel like an individual, which is a delusion, but it's a delusion that helps us cope, with reality. And so I think that a lot of it is just something that we probably wouldn't have bothered with if we had a true sense of self. And so if somebody doesn't practice, well, they have total delusion of themselves. So they continually create these problems. So they feel alive by solving them and, experiencing the angst and fears. They make you feel alive. It's something that's there in the current moment and you're terrified, and getting through that, gives you that sense of peace, which is very short-lived, and you go off to make another one. And it's a vicious cycle. I've seen that. I see that in a lot of people. That's how they spend their lives. They create their own problems, and it's so obvious that they're creating them, and they really don't have to. There's enough that just happens to us. But that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? Mark.
Well, just listening to everybody and thinking about it, it's almost like we just create a whole world out of our habits. I think when we say the reality is us, we make it, but we build it out of these sneaky habits that we've been developing ever since we were really tiny. And, we're in the habit of gravity always pulling us back to Earth, right? So they're very necessary, but we do elaborate on them. We build very, very tall structures, I guess, towers of Babel or whatever you want to call them, and they often crash. And And we have to be releasing these habits that no longer help us move. Clinging to habits, habitual thinking. It's I think we're really pretty mixed up when it comes down to unless we really take that time to just allow the habit of sitting, which seems to build like this spaciousness. And it allows the question to come up into our minds off of, why do I keep doing this? Do I have to do it anymore? Is it really necessary to live like that? So it's really a wonderful tool. And I just want to say thank you for pointing that out.
Well, Mark, that's actually, you brought up a good point, which is that many of the habits and urges that we have, we actually needed for defensive purposes or for something to keep us stable in some way. But then we reach a point where it's like just an added baggage and it's no longer necessary. And those are the things we start to loosen slowly. So I think that's a good point, that we think, oh, it was terrible, I was bad because I did this and this and this. But actually, it was necessary. Therefore, it came out and was used. And when it's no longer necessary, then that's when we still keep hanging on and don't have to. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think you're right. Samsara is a lot of releasing those habits of being wrapped in them tightly and unable to, let's say, undo the ball of string that we've wound up,
Yeah.
you know, with all its knots and all its loops and ridiculous little evolutionary things that we've gone through to get there. It's a daunting task, but you know, if you have the right end of the string and you just roll the ball away, sometimes it just keeps rolling and you unwind it.
But you know, the thing is that we don't need to think of it as samsara and nirvana anymore. We're in a point where you can just live, you know, and you're living your life and you're meeting this and that and meeting this urge and that urge, and you're thinking, no, I don't need that anymore. Why am I hanging on to it still? That's what I mean, that we just stop thinking of it as being a system of being in this world or that world or this reality or something. And we just live and have that happen, and just everything comes up and we start going through our list of things that we have and dropping them if we don't need them. And a lot of us,
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it's when we start doing battle with the world, we often are really avoiding the opportunity to discharge that energy that we've this drama, this knot we've created in our lives. It's when we don't realize where it all comes from originally is through our actions and our thoughts and speech.
yeah.
And we don't have to hold on to that. We can always, but it takes a lot of examination.
Well, it's no longer, it's not even that, it just takes a lot of living. You have to live through everything anymore. Before we tried to do it with our heads, and when we get in a place of practice, then we just throw aside all of that and say, now I just have to live through everything. Live it this way, live it that way. Live it in getting rid of, live it in taking on, you know, whatever it is, it's just living again.
Well, thank you. I just want to remind everyone we're going beyond our time here. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's I do more people here, and then we'll stop.
Okay.
Matt.
Yeah, Jane, I just want to say thank you so much for the encouragement, and to everyone participating in the discussion. It's enormously helpful. Feels enormously helpful, I should say, and look forward to putting it into effect.
Thank you. John.
Is samsara really, though, something that we create, or is it innately what is human, and then it's either samsara or nirvana based on the way we deal with it with skillful means. And what I mean by that, I think there's a lot of pressure on people thinking that they create these situations for themselves, that they've created this samsara, this, this psychological torture that they live within. But a lot of that is not anything we've created, but rather are these built-in instincts and passed down through DNA, not habits that we've even created, but anxieties about society, friends, food, all of the things that are innately in our lizard brains just from survival purposes that we have to learn to deal with. And so I don't know that it's so much that we create samsara or nirvana, but rather it exists and it's how we unpackage it.
Well,
Is that yes or no?
I think that's a yes and a no, actually, because we do create with our thinking and our emotions and with our words. But aside from that, that's like not necessary here. All the things you pointed out are like a good description of what it means to be the second arrow. You see, you have all of these things, DNA, the lizard brain, all of this stuff, and you're saying, and so we're programmed to do this and that. And the practice is saying that may be, but now what do you do when you have these as hindrances in your life? How do you handle it? So in a sense, you've made a perfect description of what it means to suffer the second arrow. You see, so it doesn't matter where it comes from. It doesn't matter what brought it. It's just an obstacle that you have to deal with. It's like you come across a rock on your path and you have to figure out how to get past it. And you can't describe the rock or anything else. You can't do anything to make it easier. You just have to live it and do it. And thinking about it doesn't really help at all. So thinking about DNA, thinking about lizard brain may be an idea for someone that's interested in knowing how it came about, but it doesn't really get rid of it when you realize how it came about. You still have to get rid of it, or you still have to neutralize it to a way that it doesn't block your life. It doesn't sabotage your life.
And it's something that we need though too, right? So the rock that you're talking about, like without the rock, without these challenges, without samsara, there is no growing, there is no learning. If we just lived in this perfect with nothing to sway us, we would just, there's really no progression then, right?
Yeah, but I don't think we have to worry about that. I think we all have enough samsara in our lives and enough struggle that, we're going to have our hands full for a long time to come. But we're lucky, it's what was it Suzuki Roshi said? We're lucky because we always have something to do. Something like that.
Well, this is putting together maybe two things that he said. But one thing he said, as you heard before, is that, I'm sorry, but you will have a problem every day.
Everybody laughed, of course, but nobody's laughing now.